Well, thanks very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, this evening. It's a pleasure to have you here at the Globus Talks. This is going to be, I think, a rather contentious topic for those who have MBAs and those who don't. And I think the opinions will be divided, not necessarily along the lines of those who have MBAs will be necessarily in favor of the proposition and vice versa. But before we get into the meat of the discussion, I'd like to introduce our esteemed guests. First, thank you very much for being here this evening. A little bio introduction. As I call your name, would you just raise your hand? Ted Katagi. Ted is a graduate of Harvard Business School. In fact, he is in the graduating class of the founder of Globus, Hori-san. Ted has held numerous senior executive positions in industry, in telecoms, chief marketing officer, and directors positions in Fidelity, and so forth. But he broke away from the corporate institutional life to form his own venture, Kenja, which we'll learn about later on in this evening's program. Welcome aboard, Ted. Ichiro Hatanaka, another Harvard Business School graduate. Mr. Hatanaka has also held senior executive positions in companies such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, Accenture. He was chief executive officer of Milky Cartoon, a Japanese contents company that publishes contents for children worldwide. He also broke from the corporate life, so to speak, and started numerous ventures, most recently Hybrid Partners, which is a fund, and he will be telling us a little bit more about Hybrid Partners and his journey along the way to his entrepreneurial goals. Eddie Liss. Eddie is a graduate of Globus, class number 1 in the English MBA program. But before he went to the MBA here, he had a very interesting and varied career, ranging from the military to launching a very, very successful jewelry company in Japan for, I guess, approximately 15, 20 years. And then after all of that, in midlife, he decided to get his MBA. And I think Eddie's is a very interesting test case because he was successful before he got his MBA, and let's see if he will be able to continue that success afterwards. So I think of all the people on the panel, you are our critical data point. Mr. Jonah Oh. Jonah comes from the world of investment banking, trader, technologist. He has worked in some of the world's largest, well, actually the world's largest investment bank, and he has spent a good many years in Japan, London, New York. He has formed a venture called Inumus Group, which is really a fascinating venture in Tokyo that leverages technologies in very innovative ways that he will expound upon as we get into the debate and Q&A. Tracy Consoley is a very, very familiar face to probably every expat in Tokyo and a good many Japanese. She created, designed, and launched the Pink Cow approximately 20 years ago. Was that, Tracy? 50? 12 years ago, but a long-term resident of Japan. Pink Cow is a landmark institution in Tokyo. And it's more than just a restaurant. It's, how would you say, a funky, happening meeting place. How is it? Did I get it right? A creative community. So I was really far off. All I know is they got great food and it's great people over there. So Tracy did this first as a female foreigner entrepreneur in Japan. I mean, if all the cards weren't stacked against you, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another situation that was. And despite that, she has created this venerable restaurant, which regularly hits the top rankings in Google searches and Lonely Planet and Travel Guides and so forth. So welcome aboard, Tracy. Neil Rosenblatt. Neil also comes from investment banking, graduate of Kellogg, had time at Harvard, MIT, Neil has spent many years in risk management, mainly in Gaishikei companies in Tokyo, and similar to some of our other entrepreneurs, broke from that approximately 6 years ago to start a series of ventures, which we'll hear about tonight. So that's it for the introductions. I would like to take a few minutes to ask each panelist just to give us a snapshot of your venture, what you're working on, and then I'd like to go right into our topic. So let's start with Hatanaka-san.
Well, thank you very much, Marky. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here tonight, and I really want to share my experience and my comment on whether MBA is good or not. My experience, though, first of all, business is very exciting, and that's everything for me. So all of my life, I want to challenge every opportunity to do anything I want. So immediately after I graduated from Harvard, I started working for a couple consulting firms, including Accenture and Nomura Research Institute and PricewaterhouseCoopers. But something was not exciting, so that's why I decided to start my own business, which is very exciting. And what MBA told me was that, is that what you want to hear from me? No.
Tell us what you learned from the MBA. Well, first, before you tell us what you learned, tell us, how much did you pay for it?
Huh?
How much was your tuition at Harvard? I mean, this is a business school. Let's get right down to ROI.
30,000? Yeah.
30,000.
30,000 a year?
A year. So 60,000 in, what was that, $1950 or? Sorry, what was the year? Approximately 1995. 1997. All right. So inflation adjusted, 60 grand. Let's say we're talking under 100 grand now. So for that, what did you get out of it, Hatanaka-san?
Oh, excitement. That's all, no? Yeah, of course, salary is one thing, and how much you get paid and how much you get back from investment, that's one of the big important things. But my version, how much I get was the excitement. And since I got an MBA, every minute of my life is very exciting. That's what I got from MBA. What do you think?
We're going to come back to excitement later on. Ted.
Excitement, yeah. You get excitement if you're an entrepreneur because you worry about cash flow every month, okay? And that's excitement, but that's not the good type of excitement, right? Actually, seriously, on an MBA, my background, yeah. So I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur when I was just in my undergrad. I just said I really want to launch a business, right? I said I'm going to keep with this dream. I keep doing this, and I thought that an MBA would be good for a couple of reasons. I thought an MBA would give me the basic tool set, and it did. I would argue that it definitely gives you that language where you can talk to people and you understand business. So it gives you that common thing. It gives you a set of tools that are useful, and that's really good. And I would say that an MBA program does do that. The other thing that I said, though, is that you have to think psychologically. There's a shift in mindset that goes with MBAs, okay? With an MBA, you're actually going to get a much better career path, okay? I went to Bain & Company, and a lot of guys go from there to senior management and all that. And you guys, if you get an MBA, you'll have that kind of opportunity too. Okay, so that's good, okay? That's a good thing, right, about an MBA. But that good thing is actually going to be a thing that you have to think about being an entrepreneur. That good thing is what actually says, it's my golden handcuffs. That good thing is going to prevent me from going and doing that. That's one good thing that happens. The other good thing that happens to most people is you get families. You have children to support, right? And when you get on and you have children in high school, you don't want to take risks, you don't want to do these things, you have a nice job. Those are the kind of things so if you say an MBA, is that an anti-entrepreneurial thing? it's a really good thing, which actually then may actually make you successful in a different way, which may make you say, hey, I don't want to be the entrepreneur. But having said that, there's a lot of MBAs that go on to directly to be an entrepreneur, and that's great too. So but I would just say, just to watch your own psychological mind shift that occurs, that you say, I got the MBA, I can coast on this nice thing, and it's so easy for me, I almost forgot my dream. I almost forgot that, hey, I'm this guy that really is an entrepreneur at heart. I was a senior executive at Vodafone. I did all those kind of executive jobs, and I thought, managing director of a private equity company, all this kind of stuff for Fidelity. That kind of stuff is golden handcuffs that actually will at some point say, I don't want to leave. But if you actually know that going into the MBA and saying, at one point I'm going to do it, and I did it pretty late, and I did it at not probably the right time for all the kind of right stuff, but if you still want to pursue your dream, and the dream is big enough, the dream will still be waiting there for you. And so go and do what you think, and the MBA is, I think, a good tool for that.
Thanks, Ted. Eddie, your perspective, please.
Well, first, it's very interesting to sit in the other side of the audience that for after a few years, and I joined MBA was late in my life. Already, I was running a business for many years. I started a business in Japan. It was my, well, I think the third business that I started. First was an insurance business in Israel, then another company here in Japan, and this was the third company. I joined the MBA not for the sake of the MBA. I wanted to study. I wanted to see how. I didn't have knowledge like you guys working in a company. I was a dreamer, and I need to know where I'm going, how is the business going on, if I'm doing the right things or not. This is the thing that were driving me, and so MBA and there's a difference between being entrepreneur and a manager. This is what I learned through this process of the MBA. If you join the MBA, do it for the right reason. Because entrepreneur, you have to dream. You need to think where you want to take your company, but you will need the knowledge. If you have the knowledge, not necessarily that the MBA is the right thing for you, because the golden handcuffs. In time, it was as well confusing being in the MBA, because you study about those cases, you think about the company, and actually you stop dreaming, because you start thinking on how organization work, and you need to find your own ideas and follow your own ideas, and this is very important for you to do. So you need to decide why you're joining the MBA, what you want to gain out of it for yourself, and if you have the spirit to take the risk, especially when your kids are growing and you have a business and other commitments, and you have to take care of the cash flow and the future, and thinks about new ideas. Those things you always need to remind yourself. If I would have done this all over again, I can tell you personally, yes, of course, I needed it in order to balance, to understand where the company is going, if I'm taking the right choices. That was my experience.
So we heard three ringing endorsements of MBA from three guys who have MBAs. Jonah.
Well, let me first start off by answering the question very directly, right? Does an MBA help or hinder entrepreneurs and managers? And my answer is, it can only help, right? I'm a big proponent of actually more education is better, okay? But, I mean, why not? If you have the luxury of being able to afford it, have the time and opportunity to get it, then absolutely, I would encourage that. And that's always been actually a personal goal of mine, right? Undergraduate, I was a biochemistry and computer engineering, right? And for graduate schools, I didn't go the MBA route. I went into financial engineering operations research as my background in 16 years in investment banking, ranging from M&A banking for telecom industries to running technology for the whole entire Asia-Pacific region for an organization like Citigroup. And I was a bond trader for many years. Now, my background there, and when I say, does an MBA help or hinder you, I say it helps you, right? And I'll just put it into layman's terms. You go to if you go to a driver's school, there's many people who can learn to drive on their own, right? And And there's some people who actually need maybe that formalized education to actually help you get past that, let's say, barrier, that little, maybe that hill. And then once you're through it, then you feel comfortable enough to be able to drive on your own. Who here can really, raise their hand and say, I drive exactly the way I was taught how to drive, right? People with one-handed driving, right? People have all different methods of driving, but the formalized education has given you the method to kind of develop your own style, right? So, again, to answer the question, I say MBAs are, I think, fantastic. Now, in terms of entrepreneurship, I think that's really up to the individual, right? I think, particularly for me, coming from a banking sector and now running a technology startup here in Japan, I think, it gives me, how would I say, it gives me wonder to say, hey, maybe having gone through an MBA program would have given me, let's say, more insights into, certain parts of, let's say, running a business that I wasn't privy to as, let's say, a bond trader or investment banker. Obviously I picked up accounting. Obviously I picked up, how to financially manage a company. But, in terms of how do you now operate and risk manage the business, that's something that, you really need to kind of understand from a holistic perspective. What are the elements from human resource management, right, to technology outsourcing, to whatever, IP, trademark, legal, and all these elements. And how do you manage that? I think you get a sense of that. You get at least a taste of that when you go through B-School programs that you wouldn't pick up from your day-to-day activity. So, from where I am now, I have a tremendous learning curve right now. From managing, one day I'm, let's say, working through the legal and legal areas or aspects of our business, to then moving on to working with resources that are all about design and how would you say, the marketing elements, right? And again, from a finance perspective, the marketing elements are not things that I would concentrate on. So, being able to go through the breadth, yeah, you can actually cut your teeth on it by trial by fire. You're actually in it, and then you learn it, and you try and do it. Or you can actually go the MBA route, get a nice taste of it, get the breadth of array of experience in all these different sectors, then figure out what works for you, right? So, from my perspective, I've gone the route of not having done it, and trying to actually cover all of that knowledge kind of just by doing. But, when I sometimes look at, Ted and the background that he has, I think, sometimes it does lead to you wondering. And he's like, yeah, maybe that does help. And there's other aspects of also getting an MBA, I think, that is very strong, because you get to build the networks, you get to kind of see how other people think, and you do a lot of cross-pollination of ideas. And I think that's fantastic, right? So I'm a big, strong proponent and encourage everyone to get one if you can. Right?
Thanks very much, Jonah. Tracy.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, the pink cow is kind of hard to explain. I don't even know how to explain it myself, really. But sort of my position on this panel is quite unique. Everybody else is sort of involved in business and ventures, whereas I'm on the creative and hospitality people side of things. So I don't have an MBA. I had a vision of something that I wanted to create, and I've spent my whole life creating things. So I just sort of did it that way, just kind of block by block, like building a Lego building or something. I do wish I'd learned more about my industry before I decided to start the business, because I had never even worked at a restaurant before. Don't do it that way. But I thought about doing an MBA, and I thought about the time and the money it would take. My brother, who's an investment banker, actually was getting his MBA at the same time I was starting my first business. And we both put in like 40 grand into the startup, at him getting his MBA, me starting my business, and 2 years later my business was up and running and moving forward, and he was out looking for a job. And so and my dad's like, well, Trace, you're doing your business 101 the hard way. You always did like it that way. So, but it's, I think it depends on what you're doing. I mean, MBAs, I think, are really useful if you're going into kind of banking sectors and sectors like that. I think you have to have one. But if you're looking at starting a small business that maybe people-oriented and creative, I don't think you necessarily have to have one. As our business grows, I'm sure I will be hiring MBAs to work for me and do those things that I don't really want to study about. Somebody else can do that. You don't have to know how to do everything by yourself. You should know if they're ripping you off. But besides that, I mean, I think that if you can be a visionary without actually knowing how to break down the little tiny nuts and bolts of things, if you can see the overall of everything. I know I'm sure Steve Jobs had lots of MBAs working for him as well, as much as he talks about you don't need it. So I think it's really an individual choice about what you're comfortable with and what makes sense to you in your life.
Thanks, Tracy. Neil?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so first I'll just push back on what Ted said because we're good friends. I mean, Ted basically said that you're gonna get the golden handcuffs after you go to business school, and then you'll be stuck in your job. Post Lehman, that's definitely not the case. I mean, lots of people lost their jobs, and I think that's been a great impetus for people starting businesses. And what I do now is strategic and marketing consulting, and a lot of it is talking to these new entrepreneurs. And so what I'd like you to think about is sort of what Jonah was touching on, but who ends up being a good entrepreneur? A lot of the people that are starting these businesses come from banking or come from consulting, and it turns out they're crappy entrepreneurs, and most of them go out of business. But then there's different types of people, and you have different backgrounds. So what I guess I'd like to challenge everyone to think about is what does it take to make an entrepreneurial company successful? And I think it's two things. One is you have to be able to run the company, and two is you have to be able to raise money for the company. And you want to think about what are the elements that go into making those successful. So in order to run an entrepreneurial company successfully, I would say that the two absolute best ways to do that would be, one, to have practiced hundreds of times. Maybe from the time, I started my first company when I was 15. And we look at the successful entrepreneurs, often they started companies very early. They messed it up. They did it again. They messed it up. They did it again. They eventually got it right. So that would be the number one best way to do it, I'd say. The second, or maybe the other best way, would be to work for an amazing entrepreneur. If you're lucky enough to work for a great entrepreneur, to find that person when they're up and coming and learn everything from them. When you get in that tight spot, when your cash flow is short, when you need to negotiate some contract, when you need to talk to your lawyer in the right way to know whether to fire them or keep them or how to feel about their $500 an hour that they're charging you. Learning from someone, I think, is very valuable. I guess the third way you could learn to run a company is what Jonah suggested, and that's get an MBA. And I think it's by far the worst. But you see 200 cases in a business school class, and you get to see what lots of other people have thought about and dealt with, and it's kind of safe. If you can't have started your own company, if you can't have worked for a great entrepreneur, then I'd say from that side, the MBA is useful. On the money-raising side, unfortunately, I do think it's very valuable to have an MBA, or have worked for a bank, or have worked for a consulting company. And I don't know why, but I guess investors think that if you can talk their language, if you went to good schools, then you deserve to get money, even though they know that bankers and consultants do horrible, mostly, Jonah accepted, at running their own companies. They should be giving the money to the serial entrepreneurs, but often the money goes to the MBAs or the bankers and the consultants. So from that perspective, I guess, yeah, it's useful, but it may not be the key to you running a great company.
Thanks, Neil. Well, how about that panel? I mean, is the opportunity cost just staggeringly too high? For example, I was speaking to a gentleman recently who was admitted to Chicago, and in an executive MBA program, tuition, in the case of you gentlemen, it was $60,000 for the full 2-year shot. Now it's $140,000, and because it's an executive MBA, there's this global component where he has to fly to Singapore almost 20 times. So add the airfare on top of that, plus incidental. So the cost for the MBA comes up to maybe $180,000, and then there's the 2-year opportunity cost where he could be actually experimenting on building ventures, as Neil suggested, plus the fact he doesn't have his salary. So, I mean, it doesn't seem to add up. Comments?
Well, I think in terms of cost, I don't think it's actually the cost in terms of economic value that you have to place there, right? Because, you know, I'm just going back to my earlier example, you know, if you need that formalized structure to learn how to drive your car, then you need that, right? And there's people who have that burning fire within them and the self-confidence to say, I probably don't need all that hand-holding and that formalized instruction. I think I know what I need to do. And, you know, I mean, going back to what, you know, what Neil had mentioned, you know, entrepreneurs are not minted by MBA programs, right? Entrepreneurs are not minted just because you also hang out with other entrepreneurs or are with successful ones, right? From my personal experience, entrepreneurs are born, right? So if you have it within yourself to say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to try and do this, then I think that is, you know, that is what an entrepreneur is, right? Is a person who doesn't have all of the things in front of him to say, I have all the information in front of me to make the decisions necessary to move this forward. Right? Entrepreneurs is all about newness, and it's about creativity and figuring out, you know, what is happening in front of you, and then figuring out what is the best path to take as these things pop up in front, right? But, you know, going back where I say an MBA, I think if you have the luxury to actually try and strive to get one, the reason that I am a very strong opponent for that is because I think it really helps you to kind of understand, you don't understand everything by getting an MBA. I think you understand what you basically don't know, right? It helps you to kind of get an idea of all the things that you don't know, and helps you to kind of really understand how much more you need to know. And I think that is the litmus test, and that's what you're paying for, right? And some people, you know, again, if you don't have that type of enlightenment, you don't know what it's, you know, that you don't know. I mean, in terms of finance, you might not know how cash flows work, right? You might just think cash in, cash out. What are, you know, subordinate debt? How do I get loans? How do I, all these things, you know, to some people, they're much more comfortable with that. But other people will just not know what are the options, you know, are available to them, just even on the cash flow or the financing side, or, you know, or the investment raising side. You don't know what your options are. And I think an MBA education helps you to kind of figure that out. I mean,
luxury. I mean, you said in the beginning, if you have the luxury. So desirable, exciting, but is it a brand good that is beyond the reach of most people? And does it impede that experimental process where you can try many times and fail? And if you're born an entrepreneur, why bother anyway, right?
Well, if you're born an entrepreneur, I mean, you know, I mean, it's great to have that confidence to feel that, okay, there's all these things that I don't know, and in fact, I know less than, you know, the people who've gone through an MBA program, and I know less about what I don't know than they do, right? But it's, you know, you have that confidence to kind of drive you forward, right? But it's of the people who aren't of that nature, maybe they don't have that as a strong characteristic, then yeah, and an MBA will actually help you propel yourself to become that, give you that little bit of self-confidence, to give you that awareness of what are the things that you need to really consider as risks to running a business, and learning about that, right? So again, you know, I mean, that goes back to my driving school analogy, which is there's a lot of people who learn how to drive by themselves. I learned how to drive by myself, right? I mean, I snuck the car around, you know. My parents, there's another cohort of mine over there, you know, understands you can learn to drive by yourself. I learned to drive, you know, manual by myself. Now, did I need to go, you know, when I actually had to go through instruction to actually get a driver's license, you know, I was there. I was just driving with my finger, you know, just trying to get through it and then take the exam, right? So for me, it's been similar in the sense that, you know, going through my investment banking career, you know, especially when you work in an investment bank, working out as an M&A banker, you feel that you need an MBA. One of the things that I found is that MBAs don't necessarily make you a better banker. It just gives you a little bit more credibility. So in terms of raising funds and investments, it certainly does help, you know, to have additional, you know, I guess, things on your, you know, on your belt to kind of parade around. But I would say that that is actually a small component of what an MBA really, you know, presents, right? MBA is great to have so that you can kind of, you know, flash this little diploma, say I've gone through the training and the rigmaroles of understanding the basics. But right now, during my hiring decisions for my firm, you know, we don't look at what is your MBA credentials. You know, when we interview you, we don't say, okay, tell me about your Finance 101 class. right? We don't ask about, oh, okay, you did higher mathematics and finance, so tell me about stochastic processing. We talk to find out, how smart are you, right? Just tell me about a problem that you had and how did you solve it, right? So whether it be a technical problem or whether it be, hey, you've done something before. Tell me what you've done. And to understand, if you understand really everything around it, or if it's just you're on the surface level and you're skimming through it, these are the questions that you only really are able to find out because you have done, right? So an MBA actually helps you to get to that point of trying to do, right? So, I mean, I look at it as an investment, luxury. Well, if you can do it, absolutely. Now, if you're on the borderline where it's like, this is going to give me a little bit of pain, is this financially, does this make sense? Yeah, it is a tough question. But, in hindsight, through all my years of, looking at MBAs who've gone, people who have gotten MBAs and not, I think, the confidence level that you see and the direction that people have taken with guys who are, who have MBAs, right, have actually typically been one of, like more insight, like more informed decisions, rather than kind of like I bounced around and I got to this great place. It's more like they know where they want to kind of get to, and they have a plan, and they achieve it. And I think that's, that's definitely worthwhile. I think that's very important.
Tracy Consoli, you're going to set us straight, all of us guys with MBAs.
Well, I agree
foolish
with
ways.
a lot of what Jonas said about needing to sort of find out what your direction is, but I don't necessarily think that getting an MBA is the only way to do that. For me, I always had a really strong vision of what I wanted to see. So getting an MBA, it was like just sort of going to take up a lot of time and money rather than just getting going with it. So I think because an MBA is such a big investment of both time and money and resources, that it's really important to consider it very carefully. So if you have a vision of something you want to build and start, and you can see it really clearly, start talking to people in that industry. Start feeling around and finding out, do you really have a vision that you can just make a beeline and go straight for? Or would it be to your advantage to take the time out to get an MBA? But the more questions you ask and the more people you talk to, take people out to lunch, buy them a drink, whatever. Pick people's brains, be polite about it, of course. But it's, you don't have to take just one path. There are lots of ways to get information. My personality type, I don't think I'm, kind of don't work and play well with other stuff. So I didn't want to sit in a classroom. I just wanted to go get it done. So that's also a consideration as well when you decide, like, do you have the kind of personality to, if you spend that money, are you going to waste it because, you're just like, oh, I don't feel like going to class, let's go to the beach. So, I mean, I would rather be building a sculpture or doing construction work, or, we're building a new restaurant. I'd much rather be building, the new interior to my restaurant than sitting in a classroom. So it depends on that too. I think everybody's got to look at their own unique personality type and financial position. And if you can see your dream, you can make it happen. Do you need those tools? Go get them if you need them. If you don't feel you need them, then move to the next step on your list.
How many false starts would you say that you had before the Pink Cow got traction and actually started to take off?
Oh, it took a long time. I mean, there were trying to get a place in Japan with no money and no experience and nothing else is kind of hard. I mean, it takes a lot of talking to talk somebody into renting you a place without any rent in the beginning, as a foreigner in Japan who's a woman. So, you've got to really be able to convince somebody of your vision. And so it took quite a few years to just like knocking on doors and trying to find the right people who to believe in what you can see, and just keep showing people. It's like the Kentucky Fried Chicken guy, right? When they said he drove his truck across the United States and knocked on doors and fed people his chicken until somebody finally invested in it. So, that was kind of, I'm just like, I can see it, I believe it, somebody knocking on doors. But, it's probably easier to get your MBA and knock on a few doors but, it depends on your personality type, I think.
How about that, Eddie? You built a successful business before you went to Globus. Is it really relevant? I mean, you did all this. I mean, not perhaps at the level of a Zuckerberg yet, but you didn't need all of this noise. You were able to try. You did your insurance company, then you did the jewelry company, you had multiple ventures, and if you were spending time swatting and studying MBA, wouldn't have that led to a totally different, maybe not a disastrous path, but perhaps you would have not made as accelerated a trajectory as you would have had you done this 25 years ago?
Well, if we talk about time, if we talk about the time, I was thinking about it a lot actually. That the time that I spent now in the MBA, what was the benefit? It was investment. The time was investment, and I think that in a way it held me back now. However, when you start, if I had the MBA years ago, it would have saved me many, many years and would give me a head start, because I didn't have how to bounce back when I didn't know how to realize my mistakes, if I'm doing the right thing. When I made a mistake, how far I should go back. And that was a thing that the MBA helped me a lot, the knowledge to understand the situation. So if you're starting a company, and before, I recommend to have the knowledge. The knowledge will save you time in the long run. This is what I think.
How about that, Hatanaka-san? Is that true? Does the knowledge actually save you time? I mean, we've worked together for years. We've known each other for almost 15 years. We've collaborated on ventures. We've had a few glorious victories, plenty of stinging failures, and our gray matter didn't seem to have helped us avoid a lot of those pitfalls. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, people usually talk about the success and MBA just correlated each other, but I don't think so. You know, the life is full of failure, and you, as an entrepreneur, you have to think about when, you know, all the time you're facing failure, right? So this is the reality of the real life. And MBA does help me to find out where is the, mines, everywhere, mines, always, failure of business. So MBA helped me a lot to find out and how to dodge all these failure, doing all these analysis and these kind of things. MBA does not help you to success. Success itself finds you, okay? You can't find success. It's just a lucky, I would say. Big success, so that's why you cannot compare yourself with Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and all these big icons. No, big success pick you up. No, you can get there. You always have, what you have to do is always to find where the failures are. That's one of the kind of, how can I say, merit I got from learning MBA. It always helped me. And in order for you to be, yes, so my definition of success is not to fail. That's my definition of success. Big success, it's almost impossible for you to get it, to grab it. You just dodge the failure. Or every day, I say every, daily life of the entrepreneur, I would say. So that's my definition.
Ted, is it a matter of timing? I mean, when you gents went through your MBAs in the early to mid-90s, the environment was very different. The thinking about MBAs certainly different. Industries such as consulting, management consulting, they were seen in a very, very different way. Knowledge was highly compartmentalized, but now you're president of Kenja. You're deeply involved in internet collaboration technologies and tools. Is it a lot like what Tracy and Neil were referring to? This is just commoditized knowledge. You can get all of this stuff free off the net. And it really boils down to not you needing to know this, but you having the leadership, chutzpah, intuition to convince or influence other people to jump on board your venture, to go in the direction you want to go. $180,000 for an MBA versus going to, Khan Academy or something equivalent and downloading the courses or MIT OpenCourseware. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you know, in the typical MBA analysis would be what is your salary going into an MBA and what is your salary going out, right? And that's you can do your spreadsheet input and you can do that. And actually, you know, there's things that would say, okay, there's certain universities you would go to for certain careers, other universities you wouldn't go to for certain other careers. Some people don't even actually make the same salary they made going into it, right? So there is a sort of an MBA analysis you can do on it, but that's short-sighting it, because there's another thing, and Eddie pointed this out, is in your own business, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, and you see, hey, you know what, I could have done, maybe you learned something in finance, and it didn't even occur to you, because in business, and when you're running a business, you have to know everything. You actually you can't say I'm a finance guy, I'm an HR guy, or I'm marketing. You have to know all the different functions. And so maybe there's a class in there that you didn't realize, but you did manage to not hire this certain guy, all right? Or maybe you actually did decide to get the right strategy. And what is that worth? That might have been worth, at that point in time, $5 million to you, because you had a big business, right? But how are you going to put that in a spreadsheet? You can't, okay? So the point is the most important thing in this whole, I think, in looking at this is, what do you want to get out of life? Actually, it's bigger than an MBA question, right? It's not an NPV question. Do you want to be an entrepreneur? Is that definitely what you want to be? No matter what? Is that not going to change? For sure? But if that was where you'd be Tracy, you would never have gone to this type of forum in the first place, right? You wouldn't have even been here, right? Yeah, you wouldn't have been here, because if you were like Tracy, you would just be going and doing it, right? You guys are here probably because you're trying to weigh it and think about it, right? If you're weighing it and thinking about it, you're and this is why I was saying this whole psychological the impact of getting an MBA. You're going to be on a different trajectory, a little bit better or a lot better off in your career. You're going to have these golden handcuffs again. I'm going to talk about that, and you've paid a lot for this education, and now you're going to say, I need to make that money back, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get my conservative career, and I'm going to do that. That's the danger of the MBA. It's the actual good side, or this other, even post Lehman. That's still the reason why you want to get a better career in a traditional, in a bigger company. That's the detriment to the MBA. Everybody else here, I think there's almost pretty uniform agreement that yeah, I mean, MBA gives you a certain tool set. It's good. You'll benefit from that. How much you benefit from it depends on what you exactly do, and you won't unless you actually know that in the beginning. And some people have really big dreams, and some people. And you know what? Avoiding failure is maybe this is more, and most people here are Japanese, but I actually don't believe in avoiding failure. You just you keep going for success, and I'm not where I want to be, and you know what? But avoiding failure is not my goal. I want to get your version of success, and your version of success. Actually, you got your version of success, which is avoiding failure, right? Everybody. You should get your own version of success and make sure that version of success matches with the MBA. That would be my biggest advice on that, right? Not do the NPV analysis and the costs and all that, because there's an X factor that you can't decide unless you know what you're going to do.
Neil.
So I'd like to take another slightly different tack again. And I learned a lot at the MBA program, and I think, I really appreciate it. I learned strategy and marketing, and it was very useful. So I'm not going to say I don't think the MBA is useful, but I would challenge us to think about what the MBA was designed for, and if the entrepreneurial track at MBA programs right now is up to snuff. And I'd say I think the answer is not. Yeah, you need your strategy and what have you, but if you think of what is an entrepreneurial mindset, all the people with MBAs here said perhaps strategy and these types of things. Tracy said something interesting. She said, it's hard to get someone to rent you a place without paying rent. And I thought that was pretty cool, because that's really how entrepreneurs think. A lot of times, when you sign a contract with someone, people are saying, well, I wonder if this is enforceable. Well, one thing that entrepreneurs know right away is that when you're running a small company, you're not going to sue anyone anyways. If you had time to sue someone, gosh, you've really made it big, right? So you're going to have to find all these different ways to enforce your contracts. Like, if she doesn't pay you, then you're not going to work. You're not going to come to work the next day. That's one way to enforce your contract, or vice versa, right? So I think it's a mindset that there are some really good business cases that do talk to that entrepreneurial side. I know there's this one great case that we did in an international entrepreneurship class at HBS, and it was called Borzoni water, which was this water, I think in Russia, maybe somebody knows of it, and it came from a special onsen. And it's really stinky, but it's supposed to be good for you. Well, apparently there are some competitors that were coming out, and they were faking the water. So they asked 170 HBS MBAs, and they said, what should we do? And they're like, well, we should sue them, and we should get the cops to come after them. And these guys at Borzoni, I can't remember the name, they didn't do that. They hired a bunch of old ladies who apparently have babushkas, who apparently have a lot of stature in Russian society. And what they do is they'd go into all the mom and pop shops, they'd pick up the water, they'd be like, this isn't real water, and they'd crash it on the ground in front of everyone. And they just did this for 2 months until they just gave up, right? So I guess you need to have a different entrepreneurial mindset, and I'd say that it's not being taught at business schools yet. Actually, I had a conversation with someone who's pretty high up in teaching entrepreneurship at one of the schools. I can't say the name right now, but one of the best schools out there, I'd say. And he mentioned something interesting. When they came up with the entrepreneurial track about 12 or 14 years ago, probably when you guys were in school, they came up with the idea, but the first influencers of the entrepreneurial track were the venture capitalists. So the whole entrepreneurial track was essentially built up on how do you raise money, right? And if you want to be a Zuckerberg, and if you want to create the next big trillion-dollar idea, and you need to go get venture capital funding, that's great. But most entrepreneurial ventures aren't ever going to get venture capital funding. They're going to build it up slowly and get something organic and gradually grow. And those skills, I think you're going to have to learn somewhere else in today's world, or you're going to have to look for an MBA program that really does teach entrepreneurial skills, and not just teach you how to be a consultant or a banker or someone in management in a big company.
Neil, specifically on that point, raising capital, wouldn't it just be easier to pay the admission ticket and go to Harvard if you're smart enough to get in and you join the old boys club and you just knock on the door and change comes from the skies, right? Basically, isn't that how you guys raise capital? No? Tell us how is it done on the inside? For those of us who didn't go to Harvard, I mean, what about that, Neil? I mean, just pay your admission ticket, and then raising capital is much, much easier because the barriers to entry aren't there. I mean, you've got the old boys club, and you can go around and ask people.
Well, I guess that goes back to my earlier concept that you do need to be able to raise money, and that's definitely something the MBA gives you, or frankly, a career in banking or consulting will give you the ability to raise money.
The ability to raise money, or is it being part of a club where you can ask people regardless of your ability to raise money or think or do anything? Just knock and the door shall be opened.
Well, I think joining any big club, I think there's value to that. But I'm now on the other side and saying, once you get the money, it's pretty embarrassing when you have some very successful friend and they give you $100,000 and you just waste it, or $200,000. At some point you've got to learn how to run a company. And the question is, are you learning those skills at an MBA school? I'd say probably not right now.
Interestingly, you just described the business model of most biotechs. How about that? Maybe we're dancing around the issue. Neil, you raised it earlier on. The question is not really one of MBA, to MBA or not to MBA, but what does an entrepreneur really need? And apparently, a criminal record may help, but maybe that's a metaphor for something. Are you willing to bet the farm on everything? And by taking an MBA, does it somehow make you substantially more risk averse? Hatanaka-san, will you bet the farm? would you bet the farm? I mean, put your house, all your possessions, everything on the line?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's it's not the go-go side of the business, but this is a reality we have to face when you start your own business. It's not just, it's not always you're facing dreams. You have to have a very hard time. I mean, you have to be very high leveraged. Otherwise, you can't be serious. Or at least myself, I can't be serious. So that's why I prefer higher leverage and doing a lot of things myself. So that pushes me a lot. This is.
Did you ever bet the farm? Did you
Sorry?
ever put everything on the line?
Oh yeah, I do.
Yeah?
I did.
More than once.
Huh?
More than once.
All the time.
All the time,
All
every
the
day.
time, yes.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Otherwise, you can be serious.
But
And-
were you like that before you entered the NBA?
Sorry?
Were you like that before you
Oh,
entered
no,
the
not
NBA?
at all.
You were
Not at all.
not. So the NBA somehow transformed you.
I don't know why, but it's not included in the MBA course. But I definitely learned that during my 2-year course at Harvard. So maybe it's not the set of the tool set of MBA, but how you get it is one of the things. Especially at Harvard. And maybe Ted may add some comment, but it's very hard. You have to fight against 99, classmate, and you have to always win the discussion, and that kind of atmosphere makes you very strong. And very tough. Make yourself very tough, and that's exactly we need when you successfully organize and continue your business. In the reality, you have to face a lot of difficulties, right? Sometimes you have to get down, but you have to fight against that. But where did you learn that? It's not in the book of marketing, not finance, but it's during the course. Fighting against your classmate, sometimes with your instructor, professor, but during which you have to learn that kind of toughness. And that's one of the things you cannot get from the books, things like that. It's not there. It's in the atmosphere of how you can get the how you learn MBA things.
But Jonah, you got that as an investment banker. I mean, you guys are at each other's throats 24/7. You don't just bet the farm, you bet the company, and in 2008, you bet the entire world economy.
Well, before I answer your question kind of directly there, maybe we'll take a step back, right? Because I think in my earlier comments, I've been mentioning how MBA is I recommend getting an MBA, right? I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Now, but that that being said, that's a binary question, right? It's like, should you or should you not? And for my standpoint is, if you can, absolutely yes, right? Like yes every day of the week and twice on Sunday. However, I think if we take a step back to this question and say, is an MBA worth it? I mean, everyone here should understand that an MBA does not instantly make you an entrepreneur. You don't get all the answers you need. I mean, what I've been saying was that it helps you to understand the world around you, right, from a business perspective. It answers questions that you may never have thought, thought the questions to actually pose, right? You get that. You understand these elements. And I think it helps to plug in a lot of gaps that a lot of people will have. Now to answer your question, how did I get through this entire process going from an M&A banker and being a risk taker, having been a bond trader? Yes, every day it's all about managing risk, right? And that's what the MBA really, is all about, right? It's about your ability to understand the risks that are in front of you that you are aware of and also potentially unaware of. But it helps you to kind of, how would you say in layman's terms, develop that third eye or that Spider-Man sense, right? To understand what are some of the things that you don't know that are out there, but makes you kind of consider, hey, have I thought about this? So that the MBA was going to also help you to understand things like, hey, I don't know much about marketing. So how do I find people who are good about marketing? I don't know much about strategy. I know I have an idea and I want to implement that, but how do I get, let's say, the resources on board to help me to achieve that, right? And I think an MBA helps you to, kind of know how to ask the right questions, right? It's not going to be how do you answer it, get all the right questions, but it helps you along that process, right? So it's a tool, and I think it's a tool amongst, many other tools that you're going to need. So if we take a step back and just, I guess say, before just saying, is it an MBA worth it, should you get it, but it should be, is it appropriate for you? I think that's the question for if you're an entrepreneur, to be very honest with you. If you're very hungry and you have a lot of intellectual curiosity and I guess very, how would you say, hands-on oriented, then yeah, as an entrepreneur, you have to kind of look at it and say, yeah, do I want to use this money for an MBA, or do I want to use it to put down the down payment on my, my business venture, my restaurant, or to pay the rent, to get staff and resourcing on, right? So I guess, if you take that step back and say, as an entrepreneur, is it a must? I don't think it's an absolute must, right? I think it's a tool, and I think it certainly helps you. And along the different points that Neil has mentioned in terms of raising funding, yeah, it helps to validate you, right? It helps to validate you before you have done, right? I mean, I think coming from an investment banking background and having 16 years in there, sure, when I go and talk with other investors, institutional level investors, yeah, we speak the same jargon, right? We understand the same concepts, and we get down to brass tacks fairly quickly. So it's not like when they say, hey, how are you going to do this leverage deal? You're like, I'm going to bring a big seesaw over, and we're gonna move that deal along. I mean, you understand where that is. You understand how you're going to structure a product, how you're going to structure a loan agreement, and you understand what components are available to you. But is that all about being an entrepreneur, knowing the finance? No. I mean, you need to be able to convince somebody to take risk on you, right? I mean, that's an element that's just for each and individual person. Are you going to be able to convince somebody, look them in the face, and convince them to basically trust you, right? To believe in you without knowing you. And, I mean, that's the nature of entrepreneurship, right? It's being able to do things without knowing, right? And I don't think an MBA, fixes that problem, but it certainly helps it, right?
What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? What is success? Any parting words on that? Let's start with Neil and go down. Words of wisdom from the battle-hardened to young venturers out here.
I don't know if I can answer the question because you were so quick about springing it on us. So I'll say what I was going to say, which might connect.
Are you running for election, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah. Jonah will get to rebut this because I disagree with what he's been saying, and I agree at the same time.
You are running for election.
And I think that the toolkit that you get in business school is really, really valuable. And after I ran my first venture and went back to business school, I sat in strategy class and I said, if I knew this, we would have made a ton of money, and we didn't. So definitely the toolkit is valuable. And definitely what all of you have said, the people that you meet really smart, really motivated people, that's really good too. But I just give you a warning from having consulted with lots of entrepreneurs and people that just became entrepreneurs and came from different backgrounds. It's definitely not enough to find that entrepreneurial something. It's some plus alpha, and it's bigger than the other stuff. It's bigger than the business school toolkit. Sure, the toolkit helps. I absolutely recommend it. But you got to find that plus alpha somewhere. If it's working on entrepreneurial startups at business school, if it's working with a great entrepreneur, joining one of these people as an intern or as a paid employee. But you got to find the plus alpha at some point where it's going to be difficult to make it successful, I think.
You, Tracy.
Yeah, I agree with Neil on that. I mean, there are certainly things that I wish that I knew more about, but would it be worth the amount of money and time it costs? Not for me, but it may be for other people. It probably is for a lot of people. But yeah, it's more about, I mean, in all honesty, I don't think most people have what it takes to be a really good entrepreneur. I don't even know if I do. I'm still working on that question. But it certainly is a drive that comes from within you and a love and a vision of something you want to do. Where you get your tools is entirely up to you and depends on, well, a lot of it, can you get finance for an MBA? Do you want to spend the time? But, that's up to you. But I think the most important thing is look into your own heart and know yourself. Do you really want to give up? I mean, my farm is like one goat and a chicken compared to these guys, but, I've bet the farm more than once. Are you willing to do that? I mean, I'm on like husband number 3 by now. You know, work comes first, man. You know, are you willing to do that? So.
I like that. It's marriage is a form of equity finance.
Anyway, it's just you know, you have to really decide, because it's sad when I watch people put everything they have into something and then go, I just, you know, I can't do this. I'm too tired. It's not for me or whatever. And it's like, well, maybe you should have just worked for somebody else. Most people do work for somebody else. I mean, my brother was smart enough to know that he just wanted to be an investment banker. He's like, I'm not risking my money. I would much rather risk somebody else's money, you know? So, I mean, it really, you have to decide. That's the first thing you have to decide, is if it's really for you to run your own company.
Thanks, Tracy. Jonah, brief closing thoughts, please.
Entrepreneurship and definition of that. I just talk about it from my perspective, you know, because I came from the banking background with a huge umbrella over me, where, you know, you don't have to think about anything other than the, you know, the poignant space that you have to be concerned about. And then having now moved over to, you know, running my own company with staffing issues and all these things, I think, you know, the things that I've experienced as an entrepreneur and running a business, you know, an entire enterprise, has been that you go through roller coasters. You know, everyone thinks that, oh, I have a great idea, I think I can do it, and they think everything is just happy days. It's not. You're going to have roller coasters. You're going to have you know, troughs and peaks, and sometimes you're going to have many times these ups and downs, even intraday. You know, in the morning you might feel fantastic and, you know, uberly optimistic and positive about everything, and then you hear just one thing, and then, you know, your day is now falling down completely onto the floor, and then you find out a different way to kind of survive. You figure out what is the next option, right? Because you had an image of what's going to happen, and it didn't happen. Except then, as an entrepreneur, you have to pick yourself up and say, okay, now what are my alternatives? Because that's not going to happen. Let me try it this way, and then it might just actually bring better results than what you had envisioned originally, right? So that's been my experience in being an entrepreneur, and the thing that has gotten me through all of that has been the fact that, you know, throughout my entire career, I've always tried to be, let's say, the go-to guy, right? It wasn't always about, okay, that guy's going to do that, and you know, he's going to do it, and just turn a blind eye to it. For me, you know, I guess a lot of people say that sometimes, you know, you have a little bit of OCD, right? Because you know, I like to be involved with everything. I like to understand what's happening, and, you know, I want to be the go-to guy. When, you know, when push comes to shove, I want the ball, right? And if you think that is your personality type, I think entrepreneurism is, you know, exactly in your alley, right? You want to be the guy that everyone turns to for that answer, and sometimes you have to reach really deep to get that. But, you know, you know, I mean, if that's you, then that's entrepreneurship, and I think that's, you know, that's a fantastic way to kind of operate on a day-to-day. I mean, every day is a new day, you know, and it's sometimes it's a daunting challenge, and other times you just, you know, you're on cloud 9. And I think that's one of the big, let's say, you know, positives of being an entrepreneur. But, you know, I think a word entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur is sometimes too overly used. You know, I think it loses its meaning. You know, I think you just have to say, hey, I have an idea, and I just want to make this thing come to reality. I want to, you know, I'm a dreamer, right? Who wants to now make that dream into reality, right?
Thanks, Jonah. Eddie?
Well, that was very nicely put. The word entrepreneur, it's so romantic, actually. It's so nice to talk about it. And it's actually hard work. And you need to work. And you need to have the ability to convince yourself every day when you wake up in the morning that you can do it. Not only be afraid of the failure, but sometimes is the chase of the feeling of success. Because you need to feel this, to do something which is great, that you managed to get an idea, make it happen, and always strive for this feeling again and again and again. So not only to be afraid from the failure that is always there, but how I achieve this success again. That's the drive. I think that you need to always find your drive when it's hard, especially, and convince yourself that you can do it, because there is nobody to run to. And you need to understand this very well. This is you, and everybody rely on you. So enjoy the trip.
Thanks, Eddie. Ted?
people are all touching the same type of theme, which is there's a lot of willpower involved in it. You know, you can think about it, you can study it, you can try to manage risk, but at the end of the day, it is being the go-to guy or the guy with the strong iron will, the guy who's willing to go, or you know, like Tracy, when you have no background on it, you just go and you just try to get the rent. You know, that strong will, I mean, there's different ways you develop it, and some people, I think I was partially, the MBA helps you build that confidence. You say, gosh, I've seen other guys, they've done this, and I can do that, right? They're no smarter than I am, you know, this kind of stuff. That happens. But this whole thing about this willpower, that's why I was just kind of talking about the psychological impact of it. We're talking about toolkit and then your willpower, right? And the willpower comes from within, but it also is built over time, the confidence and what you think you can do. So I really think that in the end, being a successful entrepreneur means being able to stare death in the face and actually see it. And it happened to me, Lehman crisis, right? And it happened. I stared it. I actually lived through it, and I'm here. And I started another company. All right, and a lot of people would have just said, "Forget it. I've had it." Right? And there are so many days. Everybody on here has seen so many days where you're saying, "It was so much easier just to have a paycheck." Right? You know, just get that paycheck, and you don't have to worry where it comes from. And I'll tell you this: as an entrepreneur. You know, the interesting thing is if you get bigger and successful, okay, now you got a $100,000 payroll. Now you got a $200,000 payroll. Guess what? If you have a $200,000 payroll and you're facing this and you can't make it, you don't have anybody to run to. Or well, you know, if you have some wealthy friends, maybe, but 200,000 to 300,000, as it starts to get bigger and bigger, and you have this valley that will inevitably occur, right? Are you going to have that willpower to somehow make it happen? That willpower, right? That drive. And if that kind of stuff scares you, if anything he said scared you, right? Of all the guys staring death in the face again, yet again, and that scares you, then don't even try this. Because you know what? Every time you see a business that shutters down, I actually really feel 10 times worse than I used to. Because I really understand what that means. They had somebody's dreams just shattered. Right? They wanted to build a restaurant. They wanted to do something, right? There's so many businesses. What is it? 80%, 90%, 95% of businesses fail after 5 years. Know that statistic, okay? And then after that statistic, does that bother you guys? If it doesn't bother you, are you really willing to go and do that? And so in the end of the day, and Tracy said this too, is not about the money, okay? It's about doing what you just feel like, you know, when I'm doing it, I feel like this is finally, I like this. I'm free from a lot of other stuff from the corporate confines, right? But if that's not you, then you know what? You have to separate that in the beginning, that willpower and that drive.
Thanks, Ted. Last word, Hatanaka-san.
Wow. All the important message already taken by these guys already. So at last, my comments is very short. On the very day of my graduation from Harvard, one of the professor said to us that, "Hey, welcome to the asshole club," you know. And I think that's the reality, you know. Starting from today, nobody around you likes you. All the people, all your friends dislike you, you know. But that's the reality you guys have to face, and it's a strong message, right? And in the business, you know. Not only Harvard, but in the business, that's the reality you're always facing. Not only paycheck and not only cash flow things, but people don't like you. You know, that's the reality. So you have to fight against that. But how you can do that? You have to confidence and you have to have the strongness to fight against that. How do you get that? This, you know, the feeling that you're the asshole. That's a starting point to be strong, I think, you know? That's a very important thing. And to be strong, you know, entrepreneurship is the best way to practice that. That's my way. And over age of 50, I'm still like challenging because I want practice my assholeness or something like that. But that's raise the energy for you to drives you ahead, I think. And the professor finally said that that's the real leadership. Not leadership to say everybody, hey, this is the way to go, but leadership for yourself. That's the continuous way for you during your whole your life, I think. So entrepreneurship is a way to train your leadership, and that's why we've been always in this practice. Entrepreneurship, I like it very much. Thank you so much.
Terrific. So we have a group of people where we see that, I often say time is the currency of our lives, and they have chosen to spend it in this way. And I think they couldn't choose to spend it any other way. It's intrinsic. It's a part of your life. You go crazy if you were to do something else. And it's about creating. And they just happen to be leading while they're creating. And it's quite amazing. And we thank them for their time, their insights. Ichiro Hatanaka, Ted Katagi, Eddie Liss, Jonah Oh, Tracy Consoli, and Neil Rosenblatt. Thank you very much.